Imagine with me, if you will, a four-frame Peanuts cartoon. Some of you may have seen this one. In the first frame, we see Charlie Brown standing in front of Snoopy's doghouse. Snoopy is on the roof with his typewriter in front of him. Charlie says, "I hear you're writing a book on theology." And then in the next frame, he says, "I hope you have a good title." And then in the next frame, a close-up of Snoopy, and we see a thought bubble that says, "I have the perfect title." And then in the final frame, Snoopy is typing, and there above his head, we see the title, "Has it ever occurred to you that you might be wrong?" I've chuckled at that cartoon a few times over the years, too, whenever I've come across it. And I think the thing that makes it so funny for us particularly is that we Unitarian Universalists believe it is in fact theological work to revisit the things we are sometimes very sure of. We come back around to revisit things. I don't know about you, but for the first part of my life, I believed the opposite to be true. I thought theology was about being certain, about having faith, about believing the things that I was taught. Not because anyone could prove them to me, but because I was supposed to believe them. And isn't there some temptation in that, the certainty of having someone tell you what is and isn't right or true? Faith, some say, is about trusting a reliable source when we don't have tangible proof. Some traditions rely on faith more than others. The Christian scriptures have many assertions that faith is the preferred path. Romans, Ephesians, Corinthians, Hebrews, and more all have statements that claim some version of faith is a critical element in the Christian life. Hebrews 11 says, "And it is impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who comes to him must believe that God exists, and he rewards those who sincerely seek him." Bad news if you're a doubter. And I think about how as a child, I wanted to believe what I was hearing at Sunday school. And I struggled with the idea that I was supposed to just believe. There were some early warning signs that I'd end up in a UU congregation. I asked a lot of questions. And some of you may have had similar experiences. Our theology, or our UU approach to theology, is more open. Perhaps we'll find ourselves in Snoopy's book when it's done. In fact, Snoopy's title may be the key to understanding modern Unitarian Universalism. For us, our practice is not in certainty, but rather is in humility, curiosity, and growth. Ours, we claim, is a living tradition. And a living tradition gains insight from different sources, and it means our understandings grow as we grow, continually reinterpreting truth in light of love, reason, science, justice. We create and co-create our truths together. However much we respect or trust our religious leaders, they are not a definitive source of truth for us. Ministers and scholars may be helpful guides, but they're not, and personally, I'm really glad I don't have the responsibility. They're not theological authorities. I don't get to tell you what to believe. We arrive, if only temporarily, at a place through our shared life, through our shared understandings, through our Sunday experiences, our conversations, our shared practices, our covenant, and even through conflict. That's where we come together, through common understandings. Our tradition does not ask us to be right. It asks us to be open. And don't we all benefit when we're open? I recently read Bill Bryson's book, At Home, in which he uses the various rooms of his house to reflect on human development and experience over the years. He recounted in his book that it has been only in the last 100 years or so that humans have begun to understand nutrition and vitamins. I had no idea that the science was that new. Now, as a child who grew up in a home where every morning I was given this odd-tasting liquid multivitamin thing that I was supposed to take, I can still imagine the flavor. It was weird. I thought that this was just an ongoing piece of human knowledge. Take your supplement, grow strong, what do I know? But prior to the early years of the last century, people knew food was needed to survive. And they had come to understand that we need proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. But until the 1900s rather, scientists believed that if you had enough of those, you'd be healthy. Yet, diseases like scurry, beriberi, and pellagra persisted. Scientists were baffled. They didn't understand it. People are getting enough food. Why are they getting these diseases? People could be getting enough calories and protein and still get terribly sick. This paradox led to the hunt for what people referred to as accessory food factors. And finally, in the years only between 1910 and 1940, the vitamins we now see listed on our food labels were identified. People thought they had the information they needed. Enough food, you'd be okay. There was some evidence to suggest that food was necessary to live and starvation was a problem. But curious people began to dig a little bit. They were puzzled by the persistence of disease, and they revisited what was understood to be the sure and certain knowledge of the day. Now, we know even more about nutrition. We know about antioxidants and micronutrients. We know that some foods, particularly in excess, can cause chronic health problems. But it's only been in the last 115 years that what we know about nutrition has had a seismic shift. There was resistance, for example, when the British Navy surgeon James Lind observed through controlled studies in the 1700s that the consumption of citrus fruit cured and prevented scurvy. But it was still decades before any regular practice to use those observations were put in place. People were very sure that they understood what was going on, and Lind's study, well, not so important. We sometimes resist new information. People sometimes resist new information for as long as they possibly can. There's a saying, you don't know what you don't know. It's true. It's annoyingly true. And yet I think it's in that observation where we can find a key to some of this. I can't know even a fraction of what there is to know. And I am grateful for many people who have over the years retained their curiosity, even when others were sure that what they were looking at or looking for was not material. Contrary to what many of us have been taught, have come to understand, there is no disgrace in being wrong. At least there's no disgrace in being wrong if we are willing to grow and learn. Coming to understand that I may be wrong about any of the things I believe about the world, my favorite sports team, the ways that organizations should work, or my beliefs and judgments, is, I think, the beginning of spiritual growth. And that's what we want to encourage here. I've told you before about my arrival at a UU congregation over 40 years ago in Hamilton. When I arrived there, I was delighted to find a spiritual community that wasn't top-down, that didn't have a religious leader telling me what to believe, that assumed people were able to do their own discernment, drawing their own conclusions about the big questions. It was refreshing and affirming. I'd left the faith of my childhood over a profound disagreement over the principle of original sin. I just couldn't do it. It was the sort of religious community, the UU one we found, that we wanted for our family. And I was delighted some years later when one of our daughters likened the congregations to the book she enjoyed, where at the end of a piece of plot development you were given a choice. If you want to believe in God, go to page 15. If you're agnostic, turn to page 10. And if you're firm in your atheism, go to page 18. Choose your own adventure. You do get to choose here, but there's a catch. Here we are each making our own choices and trying to make a story and a community while we do that. This business of choosing, of curiosity, is in our UU DNA. One of the first North American congregations to ever call itself Unitarian in the 1920s was in Dedham, Massachusetts. They created what we now refer to as the Dedham Covenant. And earlier, so a couple of hundred years before they called themselves Unitarian, they created the Covenant. And here's what it's some of the points of it. 1638, they declared they would walk together in love, watch over one another for good, respect the decisions of the community, and seek God's will together. There's nothing in that covenant about ministerial authority or scriptural exactitude. And the covenant we now share weekly, the one we read earlier, is adapted. It was written in 1894, and it's really just a restating of that covenant. We too declare that love is central. We too acknowledge that we take care of one another, and we don't insist on theological conformity. We're creating a community together. And our understanding and our language is changeable. When you take textual authority or priestly infallibility out of the mix, you have a tradition that changes. We keep exploring and asking questions, knowing that today's answers, informed by community insight, science, and tempered, always tempered by humility, well, what we understand today might not be what works for us in the years to come. I don't know about you, but my UU spidey senses start to tingle when someone is very sure of themselves. So yes, ours is a living tradition. And yet it's often hard for us as individuals and communities to adapt to new realities. It's hard because changing your mind about the big stuff, the deep stuff, can be disorienting. For many of us, our identity is deeply connected to our values, our ideas about what is true and what isn't. I think of myself as open-minded and open-hearted, someone who doesn't adhere to rigid ideas of right and wrong, someone who likes nuanced thinking, who believes in giving people the benefit of the doubt. I am, I think, quite unabashedly liberal in many ways. My sense of self is strongly connected to my way of thinking, being, and identifying. And I wonder what it would be like for me if I came face to face with evidence that suggested my ideas about what makes a person valuable and precious or not were wrong. I'd struggle. Who am I if I'm not a feminist or someone who's striving to dismantle colonial, racist ways of thinking? I'm not sure I know the answer. It's easy for me to push away evidence that our thinking regarding the big questions is wrong. Confirmation bias, our tendency to process information by looking for or interpreting information that's consistent with our existing beliefs, is alive and well. We don't do it on purpose. It's largely unintentional. And as a result, it's easy for us to ignore information that's inconsistent with our beliefs and understanding. And when the question at hand is highly important or self-relevant, we are especially likely to process information that supports our own beliefs. It's just the way our brains work. Undoubtedly, it makes us feel safe, and undoubtedly there's a deep evolutionary self-preserving reason for having our brains work that particular way. And it seems in these difficult, polarized times, when social media algorithms ensure we encounter more of the same, it's even harder to hit the pause button, to ask if maybe, just maybe, our brains are taking the easy road. I don't think that we're willfully ignorant or that we cling to our oh-so-certain viewpoints because we're arrogant, but rather because it's hard for us to do otherwise, and because the possible unraveling of our beliefs can be profoundly disorienting. Here in this community, we are asked to live at least some of the time with the unknown and with ambiguity. We have, for almost the last 400 years, been holding the relationships among and between people as more important than any one person's interpretation of the right way or the truth. What does this tradition ask of us? It's a tall order, I think, but there are a few things. And knowing it is hard, it's probably useful to think of the work of openness and admitting new truths and beliefs as part of a practice rather than an arrival point, rather than a place we'll ever truly arrive. In my understanding, a UU approach would be to celebrate people who thoughtfully share that they believe they were wrong. Well, thank you for letting me know that. That's useful. People who revisit previously held beliefs, changing our mind, refining understanding, or perhaps not and sometimes not shifting our thinking at all of those things are okay. What isn't okay, I don't think, is a refusal to even consider the possibility. The practice of considering other possibilities is important. And in a world where binary thinking, yes, no, right, wrong, good, bad, is becoming so common, I sometimes fear we've forgotten to live with nuance and wonder. In that world of binary thinking, our philosophical commitment to community, to curiosity, and to openness seems particularly important. If we can make this our practice, an ongoing practice, not just here, but in the world beyond our congregations, we'll be living our values in a very concrete way. History affirms this. People who were brave and honest enough to ask hard questions have helped us to undo some of the harms and hurts. Growth for individuals and societies happens when people realized they were wrong. Enslavement, historic exclusion of women and LGBTQ+ individuals, those were wrong. Unitarian Universalism in the world in which we live has changed because people were not afraid to say, I was wrong about that. What would it take for us, for me, to truly cultivate a practice of wrongness, a practice where the times when I realized I was wrong were not considered a failure? What would that look like? Here are a few things I think might be key, things that perhaps we should be teaching and celebrating. The first, I think, is holy curiosity. Holy curiosity characterized by ongoing review, by asking, what might I be missing? And then a commitment to listen, really listen, for understanding and insight. A second one I think we can practice is deep humility, which doesn't mean no convictions, but pairs commitment and an openness to new information, to a revision of understandings, that pairing. And the final one I suggest that we work on is repair and accountability. Because a willingness to name the times when we've been wrong will also inevitably require us to acknowledge that we may have caused harm. It will be important then to make apology, to repair, and to show a commitment to growth, to next steps. Let's face it, we're all human. We're all fallible. The question is, do we want to be people who dig in and refuse to consider other ideas, approaches, and understandings? I don't think that's the kind of community we want to be. But rather, I think we want to be a place where minds can change without shame, and where messy human people and all their questions are welcomed. Ours can be a community where others are changed when we tell our stories. We want to establish a loving practice of being a brave space and a safe space. Perhaps more importantly, the work we do here, clunky and imperfect as it might be, can be a training ground for the world. Here we can be wrong because we have a covenant to hold one another in love. It's easier here than in the larger community. But in my dreams, those things we aspire to for our beloved community might ripple, imperfectly of course, into the world. So let's start the practice now. You don't have to share with anyone, but I invite you to reconsider some of what you might believe. You might end up thinking just the way you do now. That would be okay. But maybe, just maybe, you might find some of your certainty fading. You might find your heart opening a little bit. Here are a few questions. Let's sit with them for a moment. Where might I be holding certainty too tightly? Who have I stopped listening to? What belief has helped me that might now limit me? And what would it feel like to loosen my grip? These are simple questions, but they're hard ones too. They ask a lot of us. Perhaps each of us can spend a bit of time each day with one or more of them. Something might change, something might not. We won't know unless we try. I'm not asking us to throw out all the knowns of our life, but I'm suggesting we might find ourselves changed, growing, learning, wiser, if we consider the possibility. Has it ever occurred to you that you might be wrong? And to close, I offer this wish. May we be a people more devoted to truth than to being right, more devoted to growth than to certainty, and more devoted to one another than to our own opinions.